Navigating broken sleep as a new mum or a mother of a wakeful baby is maybe one of the most challenging parts about early motherhood. Facing night after night of broken sleep and wondering when you're ever going to get a break and how you're possibly going to keep surviving and keep coping. We quickly learn why sleep deprivation is used as a form of torture. It can take a toll, and this can happen very, very quickly, especially if we don't have the right support around us or the right tools and knowledge to be able to manage and survive through this very, very tough season. For many mums that I work with, the conventional approaches to managing sleep deprivation and broken sleep with baby don't align with their values. And what I'm talking about here really is changing baby sleep, modifying baby sleep, sleep training, really. They don't align with the values of a lot of the mums I work with. This was the case for me when I was in those early months and years of broken sleep with my baby. It didn't feel right. It didn't feel like the right step for us at that point in time. Based on many factors, it's totally individual. But for those mums, they're left feeling like they only have one of two choices in this situation. It's either wait it out and suffer in silence, don't complain. God forbid you should complain, because if you do, then everybody's so quick to say, well, here's the solution, sleep training. Or the other option that mothers feel like they only have is cry it out, relent to some form of training. So wait it out or cry it out. But there's so much room in between those two choices. And really, like, the room in between those two choices is about supporting your health as a mother, supporting your energy, protecting your sleep, prioritizing your well-being alongside babies, so that both of you can get through this season ever and prevent you from completely burning out. Hi, and welcome to this video. If we haven't met before, if you're new here, welcome. And if you're coming back for another video, welcome back. I'm Georgie. I am a mother and a naturopath for tired mums, and I support tired mums just like you to overcome exhaustion, rediscover themselves in motherhood, and go on to enjoy the wild ride of motherhood for years ahead. If you are in fact a tired mum, then you might benefit from my free guide for tired mums to boost their energy even when you're not sleeping. It's the perfect starter guide to get you on your way. After you watch this video or listen to this podcast, hop over to the link and download your copy. The link will be just below the video here in the description box, or if you're listening to the audio, the link will be on the page of the audio file. It steps you through 7 really simple, everyday, totally practical ways that you can boost energy. And these are the places that I start most with the one-on-one clients that I work with. We've got to get these foundations in place before we worry about moving on to other things. All right, today we are going to be covering surviving broken sleep, surviving sleep deprivation, and we're going to cover off a few things here. I'm going to talk about, yes, the 5 most important things that you need to get in place to support yourself through this phase. But we're also going to cover why protecting sleep quality is important and the difference between sleep quality and sleep quantity. We're going to touch briefly on sleep hygiene, what that is, and then dive straight into our 5 important things to do to protect your sleep. So let's begin with talking about the difference between sleep quality and sleep quantity. It's probably self-explanatory, but sometimes it can be useful just to tease apart the difference between the two a little bit more. Sleep quantity is referring to how much sleep we're getting, how many hours of sleep, how many hours in the bed are we having. Sleep quality, on the other hand, is really about that sleep that you are getting. Is it really restorative and refreshing? Or is it lower quality, poor quality, restless, unsettled sleep, and therefore not serving its purpose as resting, restoring, and repairing the body? So is it good quality or poor quality? And really what we're referring to there around the quality is about our sleep cycles. So how many sleep cycles are we going through? Are we going through a full sleep cycle? And are we getting down into those deeper sleep states that we know help to really give us that re-energizing and refreshing us for the next day ahead. It is possible to have adequate sleep quantity, so getting enough hours, but poorer sleep quality, and therefore not getting the benefits of sleep. And so this would be, this is unusual in the context that we're talking about, mums of wakeful babies, but let me just explain it. Some people do get, those 7 to 9 hours sleep every night, but they're waking still unrefreshed every morning, feeling groggy, tired throughout the day, sleepy throughout the day. And so with that type of situation, we're probably looking at poor sleep quality. But in the context of early motherhood, wakeful babies, waking through the night, obviously our quantity, the amount of sleep we're getting, is broken or compromised or fractured. And there's not a lot you can do about that. We touched before on sleep training and trying to shift patterns with baby sleep. And look, that is an option for families if they feel like it's the right step for them. But if you don't feel aligned with any of those options and you want to take more of a go with the flow approach, continuing to respond to your baby in the night, then modifying the sleep quantity, the amount of sleep, is not always going to be the best place to focus our energy. Instead, we can focus on doing everything within our power, with our resources, our knowledge, our time, our energy, to improve or protect our sleep quality. And I spend a lot of time talking about this with the mums I work with, talking about it on Insta. It is so important and often overlooked because we assume, my sleep is broken, baby wakes through the night, there's nothing I can do about that. There's nothing I can do around sleep, but that's not true. And we're going to talk about the important things that we can control, that we can change to improve the quality of the sleep that you are getting. Which brings us to this idea of sleep hygiene, which is a term used to describe the daily practices and the environment around us that influence our sleep. Having good sleep hygiene means that we follow as many of the sleep supporting practices as possible to protect and prioritize our sleep, whereas having poor sleep hygiene is likely to result in that poorer quality sleep that we just talked about, maybe restless, interrupted sleep that's unrelated to your child and their wakings. Or you might have difficulty falling asleep or staying asleep throughout the night and then waking up feeling unrefreshed and tired. And it can be tricky when you, in the context of, wakeful baby, how much tired is normal, but more tired, more unrefreshed than we would expect for you in that circumstance. So some of the factors that are important or that we consider around our sleep hygiene to have good sleep hygiene and support good quality sleep are things like your bedtime routine and what time you're going to bed, your caffeine consumption across the day, the amount of natural sunlight that you're exposed to during the day, especially in the morning, the amount of artificial light, blue light in particular, that you're exposed to, especially in the evening, regularity of your bedtimes and your wake times, your bedroom environment, so including things like temperature, noise, light, and your bedding, situation, alcohol intake, especially in the evening, and also it would include other daily activities like exercise, food and meal choices, meal timing, and other factors like smoking or other recreational drug use. So it's a big topic, and the good thing is that it means there's lots of things that we can work on changing and shifting if we need to. Sometimes learning all this can feel overwhelming, especially when you're tired and run down, but try to take it slowly, one step at a time, focus on one factor and then change that, and then you can move on to the next thing. The 5 most important things that you can do to protect your sleep. Let me tell you the 5 things up front so you just know them, and then you can skip ahead in this video or podcast to the specific things that you want to learn more about. Number 1 is be mindful about your caffeine consumption during the day. Number 2 is reduce your exposure to blue light in the evening. Number 3 is go to bed earlier. Number 4 is get plenty of morning sunlight. And number 5 is do some nervous system relaxation before bed. All right, those are the 5. Let's start with number one. Number one, be mindful about your caffeine consumption during the day. Caffeine, and really when we're thinking about caffeine, we think about coffee, but caffeine is the active molecule in coffee. So I'm going to refer to caffeine here. I've talked about this before and the impact that caffeine has on our energy levels as mom, but particularly around our sleep quality. And that's what we're talking about here today. It can significantly impair sleep quality, and it does this by blocking the receptor for adenosine. And adenosine is a molecule found in our central nervous system. It's involved in initiating sleep. And it's kind of sometimes thought about as the sleepy molecule. It's responsible for what makes us feel sleepy or drowsy. And caffeine blocks the action of adenosine. And that's why we feel more alert when we have coffee. But the impact of this is if we have too much coffee or caffeine rather, or the timing of it is a little bit off, then it can impact our ability to fall asleep, but also stay asleep and maintain good sleep across the night. So impacting that sleep quality piece that we talked about. A lot of people assume that if they don't have trouble falling asleep, then the caffeine that they've consumed in the day must not be impacting their sleep. And this may be true depending on how much they're having or the timing of when they're having it. But sleep studies have shown that caffeine can still impact our sleep quality, even if we don't have trouble falling asleep immediately at the start of the night. And for a lot of mums, what I see is that we're so exhausted, so tired that falling asleep, that sleep onset piece is easy. It happens easily. But with having too much caffeine or too much caffeine goes to sleep, and we'll talk about exactly what we want to do around that in just a moment, then it lead to more restless, more wakeful sleep across the night, leading to feeling more tired the next day. Things we have to think about around timing are that caffeine has a half-life of 5 to 6 hours in the body, meaning that it takes this long for half of the caffeine to be cleared out of the bloodstream by the liver. Or if you extend that, it's going to take 10 to 12 hours before only a quarter of the caffeine is left circulating. So think about if you have your morning coffee around, let's say 8 a.m., there would still be a quarter of the amount of caffeine from that cup of coffee circulating at like 6 to 8 p.m. Then if we add a second or a third coffee on top of that, obviously the amount of caffeine in the body increases, the amount that needs to be cleared increases. And depending on when you're having those coffees, there still might be a significant amount of caffeine in the body by the time you're heading to bed, getting the head on the pillow and trying to sleep across the night. So this is why the timing and the dose is really important. Now, caffeine obviously found in coffee, but also in things like black tea, green tea, guarana, and also cacao. So things, or cocoa, and also things that are made with that. So chocolate. It's also added into energy drinks, things like Red Bulls, and also Coke and Cola drinks. So we just need to be mindful that it comes in many different drinks and food products. Decaf coffee has been decaffeinated to an extent. It's never 100% decaffeinated, and there's variability between products. So some only have, 1% of the original amount of caffeine, whereas others have up to 10 to 30% still left over. So it's important to check the packet, maybe talk to the manufacturer or the roasters if that's possible, and check how much they decaffeinate their coffee, because if you're drinking that decaf coffee later in the day as a substitute to coffee, which is something that I recommend, but it can often, still be part of the problem if we're not mindful of how decaffeinated it is. So my recommendation for coffee when it comes to protecting sleep is to try to limit to 1 cup per day. And look, as I said, it comes in many different drinks. So if you're more of a tea drinker, or you're having, Cokes or energy drinks, which PS, I wouldn't recommend, but if you are having those, you still need to be mindful of where all the sort of caffeine are coming from. But I'm just going to talk about coffee because that is really the most common thing that I see. So my recommendation for coffee is try to limit to 1 cup per day, and having that cup of coffee before midday or no later than midday. Of course, there might be occasions, there might be days where you do have 2 cups, but try to make those the exception, not the norm. For drinks after midday, opt for that decaf, but just be mindful of how caffeinated or decaffeinated it is, and then choosing non-decaffeinated options. And I have a post on alternatives to coffee. I'll link that for you just below this video or down in the blog post if you're listening to the audio. That brings us to number 2. Try to reduce your blue light exposure in the evening. So when we say blue light, we're thinking about a certain type of light. Light is measured on this spectrum of frequency and wavelength. We've got blue light on one end and red light on the other end. And blue light is the type of light that comes from the sun. So when our brain senses blue light, it thinks daytime. It thinks get up, get going, be alert, get shit done. But the trouble these days is we have all of these devices. We have phones, computers, tablets, laptops, TVs. These are all LED lighted screens, and these emit blue light. So you might be able to imagine the trouble here if we're looking at screens in the evening, which is typical for most of us. We're unwinding, we're relaxing, we're, have our little personal time before we have to go to bed. We're often doing that on screens. And so we're getting this blue light into the brain in the nighttime, and the brain's going, ooh, it must be daytime. So there's confusion. It's a mismatch in terms of our environment and what our brain is expecting based on the time of day. When we detect that blue light, when our brain detects that blue light, a cascade of internal biochemical changes happens. One of the most important ones for our conversation here is that it suppresses melatonin levels, melatonin production. Melatonin is another central compound around sleep, regulating sleep. It helps with sleep onset. And what we want to see, what we expect, is that our melatonin levels rise significantly in the evening and they stay high across the night to help us get that good quality sleep. And as we come towards morning, when we'll be waking up, they start to drop off. But with the blue light exposure, melatonin levels get significantly blunted, and so we get impaired sleep onset and sleep quality across the night. So my recommendation for reducing blue light exposure in the evening is try to dim the house lights as much as possible after sunset, as much as is practical, turning off lights that you don't need, using low lighting, using lamps, dimmers if you've got that capacity in your house, even candle light as we get closer and closer to bed. We want to be dimming down as much light as possible, and our overhead lighting for the most part in the house is also this blue light. We also want to activate blue light blocking apps or night mode on our phone, computers, tablets to be able to block some of that blue light when we actually are using these devices. And look, I use them too at night, but I just make sure I have my night mode activated on my phone. I've got Flux, Flux is an app I use on my computer if I'm working at night, and there are other options available too. Make sure you have these activated because that will significantly dampen down the amount of blue light that's coming out of that device and impacting your melatonin levels. And the third point here around this is try to aim to have at least 1 hour of screen-free time before you intend to fall asleep. So if you're trying to fall asleep at 9:30 or 10, you need to be off your screen by 8:30 or 9 at the latest. And that's giving our body a block of time to start lifting those melatonin levels ready for sleep. So quick summary there, we want to dim the house lighting inside as much as possible after sunset. We want to activate blue light blocking apps or settings on our devices, and we want to have 1 hour of screen-free time before we go to sleep. Now, number 3, go to bed earlier. This one is so simple. It sounds so simple. It's often overlooked, or it's a tricky one to put in place for various reasons that we'll talk about in a minute, but it's often the thing that can make the biggest difference. Research around sleep repeatedly shows that adults really want to be aiming for that 7 to 9 hours of sleep. That's when we are functioning our best, both cognitively and physically. Our health is best supported by that amount of sleep. Obviously, for many of us in this situation with a wakeful baby, this sleep is going to be at the very least very fractured or probably even reduced. So we can try to counteract some of this fracturedness and reduced sleep quantity, the amount, by going to bed earlier. And this allows a large enough window of opportunity to try and make up for some of that lost sleep, or try and get as much of that 7 to 9 hours as is possible within the circumstance that we're in. It often means going to bed much earlier than we are or that we're used to, which is so much easier said than done, because for many mums, and I know this was the truth for myself in this, in the early phase, those hours in the evening are often the only hours that we have to ourselves, our me time, our personal time, uninterrupted, quiet, peaceful. And so going to bed earlier often means compromising on having some of that time, giving some of it up. So it's a bit of a balancing act, and we'll talk about a little bit more. Personal time is so important for our health. It's one of the key pillars of the foundations of our health. So I certainly don't mean to say that it's not important. Like, I value it for you and I value it for myself, but if you are in this season of tired where you're waking a lot through the night, sometimes we have to prioritize certain things, and the sleep and the rest piece, that needs to be kind of number one. And the personal time, not to push it to the side altogether, but we just need to be a bit more creative and flexible about when we're having that time, and also planning ahead can really help here. To make it easier to prioritize sleep and rest in the evening, we need to find time for personal time somewhere else. So often that means working with your partner, your support person, a friend, a family member, whoever's there to help you to make a plan in advance. And this will look different for everybody, but it could be 30 minutes in the morning before your partner goes to work, or 30 minutes in the early evening when they first get home from work, where you have that time to yourself. Maybe not every day, but as many days in the week as is practical and you guys can arrange. Or it might look like a few hours on the weekend when partner's home or support person is around, or friend or family can come over to help. Or maybe one night a week you get a couple of hours to yourself and someone else can step in to help with certain things, either around the house or with the care of your baby. Obviously, it's going to be a hugely personal thing in terms of what works, what's practical, but just a couple of ideas so that you can get little snippets of time that are planned in advance so you know they're coming, you can use them intentionally, and it frees up some of that time in the evening for you to be able to go to bed earlier. When it comes to actually going to bed early, like how early are we talking here? As a very blanket statement, rule, recommendation for mums, I say in this season, wakeful baby, really you should be looking at being in bed no later than 9:30 p.m. But if you want something a bit more personalized, we can do a bit of a practical kind of calculation. And it starts by thinking about when you or your baby typically wakes up in the morning. So let's say that's 6 a.m. for you. We can work backwards from there to try and get the bare minimum. Let's work the bare minimum of 7 hours. So you'd need to be in bed by 11, like asleep by 11 p.m. at the latest. But of course, baby's waking through the night, so you need to think about how many times they're waking, how long you're awake for to help them, and then add on more time at the other end in the evening. So often that looks like adding in an extra hour or two to account for all the night wakings and to try and add an extra buffer in there so you get more sleep, which would mean, based on this example, so with 6 a.m., 7 hours backwards from that is 11 p.m. and add an extra hour or two means 9 or 10 p.m. latest asleep in the bed. So you can see how early we need to work, be aiming for in the bed in the evening. Some of you might already be doing that, but I do talk to and work with a lot of mums who are going to bed much, much later than that. And so they're really cutting their window of opportunity for sleep short. All right, number 4 is get as much morning sunlight first thing in the morning as possible. Good quality sleep starts from the moment we wake up in the morning, which is related to our circadian rhythm, our body clock, our internal body clock, or our sleep-wake cycle. Our sleep-wake cycle is regulated by both our cortisol levels and our melatonin. We just talked about melatonin in relation to blue light exposure. Cortisol is the hormone that is dominant in the daytime. Cortisol sometimes gets a bad rap. It's not good or bad. It just is. We just want it to be in the right levels at the right time of the day. And we want to see our cortisol peak first thing in the morning. This is what helps us feel alert and energized and switched on and ready for the day. As cortisol will drop off towards the afternoon and early evening, that's when we start to see those melatonin levels rise, which is starting to prepare our body for sleep. So cortisol comes up in the morning, keeps us going, alert, awake. Melatonin takes over in the evening, preparing us for good sleep across the night. And this rhythm switch awake, asleep, day after day on this 24-hour cycle. For mothers facing ongoing broken sleep, the cortisol melatonin dance can often get tipped out of balance. And our morning cortisol response, that you'll remember I said is normal, we want that to happen, we need that to happen, can get blunted, which leaves us feeling really foggy and unrefreshed and exhausted in that first part of the morning. Or it can get shifted and occur later in the day. And that's when we might ourselves getting a rush of energy, either in the afternoon or the early evening. Sometimes we don't see that, but we still know that the cortisol peak, the cortisol levels have been shifted to a later part of the day. And then this can impact our sleep because we're not getting that nice takeover of melatonin. We have the cortisol still circulating, making us feel alert and awake and not allowing us to fall asleep. So this is where the sunlight comes in. Sunlight exposure first thing in the morning is one of the primary signals to our brain and our nervous system to have that cortisol awakening response. That's what it's called, a cortisol awakening response. We expect to see the sunlight first thing in the morning on our eyes, which signals to our brain. But of course, we live in a different life now where we're often inside and we don't see sunlight first thing in the morning. But we can use it as a tool. The sunlight will help to trigger that cortisol awakening response. So we're regulating the circadian clock, the circadian rhythm, to help us feel more energized in the morning and to protect our sleep quality at the other end of the day. So even though it's first thing in the morning, it is connected to what goes on with our sleep in the evening. So my recommendation around this is to get direct sunlight exposure. So what I mean by that is going outside as soon as possible after waking, but ideally at least within 30 minutes. Aim for 10 minutes. That's sort of a good spot to start, but every minute will be beneficial. So if your mornings are busy and rushed, some of mine are very busy and rushed, getting kids to daycare, getting to work, or whatever it might be for you, every minute is still beneficial. So do as many minutes as you can, but at least 10 is really going to help us here. Expose your face and eyes to the sun, so no sunglasses here. Obviously, be mindful of looking directly into the sun and not damaging your eyes, but just be reasonable when you do this. And often people are like, what if it's cloudy? What if it's raining? Cloudiness is going to impact the brightness of the sun, obviously. So what usually means is we might need a little bit longer out there to get the same effect, but the brightness of the sun behind clouds is still far brighter than indoor lighting or any artificial lighting that we could otherwise use. So it's still going to be beneficial. Just try to maybe do an extra couple of minutes. If it's raining and you have to be inside, stand by the biggest window in your house. Again, this is not going to be anywhere near as bright as being outside on a sunny morning, but it's still better than not doing it. Again, it's about timing. You might need a bit of extra time. Like, can you eat your breakfast next to the window? Can you drink your coffee next to the window? Can you, do a little bit of morning play with baby, do your stretches, whatever your morning routine looks like? Can you do it somewhere close to that really big window? So at least you're getting as much time as possible there. Our fifth and final important factor is doing some nervous system relaxation before bed. Our nervous system is the system of importance when it comes to sleep. It is the system doing all the work in terms of helping us fall asleep and then stay asleep across the night. And we really want to have a calm and relaxed nervous system in order to fall asleep and then get that good quality sleep across the night. If our nervous system is switched on to active or tense, sleep can be impaired. A little bit of background on the nervous system, if you're not familiar, we have two branches of our autonomic nervous system, the sympathetic branch and the parasympathetic branch. And when one of these branches is switched on, the other is switched off and vice versa. They can't be on at the same time. Sympathetic mode or the sympathetic branch is that fight or flight mode. So you might have heard of the fight or flight response. That is the branch of our nervous system that is alert and scouring the environment for danger and then responding to any dangers or threats that it needs to. These days, that fight or flight definition is expanded to fight, flight, freeze, or fawn, but it's the same thing. Our parasympathetic branch is responsible for many of the other underlying processes and systems, ticking along in the background, things like our digestion and our reproductive function. And it is only able to be active, switched on, working when we are in a calm and rested state, and when sympathetic mode, fight or flight, is switched off. For sleep, we really want to have our parasympathetic mode be the one that is working, that is switched on. But for many of us, especially in this phase of early motherhood, we are chronically in sympathetic mode. We're sympathetic dominant. We are in fight or flight state. There's so many little stresses in life, the whole sleep piece being one really big one, and just the thought of sleep at night, every night, can be a trigger for feeling stressed and feeling like that's making me anxious, that's a threat, that's a danger. So that in itself is one, but of course there's all the other things we have going on in our life as well. We might be, juggling multiple children. We might be navigating our matrescence, our initiation into motherhood. We might be returning to work. We might have sickness in the house. We might have financial strains. There's so many other factors that are triggering that stress response, of which the fight or flight sympathetic branch is a part of. So when we're in this state, chronic stress, chronic nervous system activation, then it's not very conducive to good quality sleep. So that's why we want to do some practices in the evening that help us relax the nervous system, switch from sympathetic to parasympathetic, switch into rest and digest mode. And there's lots of ways we can do this. It's going to be, again, a very personal decision in terms of figuring out what works for you, what you have the time and space for. You might be tried some of these things already, and so adding in another layer, but it could be things like meditation practice or some types of mindfulness techniques. It could be breathing exercises or some biofeedback techniques which help you to regulate or control your heart rate or breathing rate. And this can be done using like a sensor that talks to your phone, or just some standalone apps on your phone that can guide you through this process. It might be gentle forms of yoga, so something like a yin yoga or yoga nidra, and it doesn't have to be a full workout, just a couple of minutes before bed can help to bring us back into that grounded state. And then we can lean on supplemental support as well, can be very useful here. So nutrients that we're often reaching for are things like magnesium, glycine, GABA, or even L-theanine. And magnesium is a mineral, but the other three are amino acids, which are very useful for promoting that rest and digest nervous system state. And then herbally, so herbal medicine, we've also got tons of options there. Herbs that help to relax and calm the nervous system, herbs that have an anti-anxiety effect if that's part of the picture, and herbs that even have a gentle sedative or hypnotic effect. So they're actually helping us to feel more sleepy and slip into sleep. And those might be herbs like passion flower, skullcap, kava, withania, hops, lavender, lemon balm, valerian, chamomile. There's really a lot of options. This is where herbal medicine can really shine. So if I'm choosing to use some supplemental support with mums, it's often, like one or two of those nutrients maybe combined together, and then potentially a little herbal liquid blend, which has been specifically formulated for each individual mum based on what's going on for them and what combination of herbs is going to be most effective. One final thing I'd like to touch on before we finish up is to be aware of potential underlying causes of poor quality sleep. So of course, we've got your wakeful baby, and there are lots of those diet and lifestyle and environmental factors. We didn't even touch on all of them. The ones I've touched on today are just the 5 most important ones that I think are the most important for mums and which have the biggest impact, but there are also others. But look, if you've explored some of these, if you've gone down the sleep hygiene path and you're still feeling exhausted, you feel like you've got all those pieces in place and it hasn't made a difference, or you're just really struggling with your energy, particularly in the morning, then it might be worth just thinking about some underlying factors, because there are very real conditions, health conditions, and disease states that we see impact sleep. So some of the common ones, especially that I see in mums, are things like hyperthyroidism. Food sensitivities or reactions can trigger that kind of nervous system stress state. Adrenal dysregulation, chronic stress, which we sort of talked about a little bit today, mental health conditions, and also sleep apnea. So really important to just get a thorough assessment if you've kind of gone down some of those paths and not seeing the results. Often you need someone to, do the full assessment and then potentially some investigations to check on some of those things there. There you have it, the 5 most important things that you can do to protect the quality of the sleep that you are getting in this wakeful phase or with your wakeful babe. Broken sleep is no joke, and it will impact your overall health and vitality, but the goal here is to help you survive this phase and go on to even thrive and enjoy your journey through motherhood despite the broken sleep. And we want to prevent burnout, and starting with protecting your sleep quality is absolutely crucial. So let me know in the comments down below which one of these 5 changes you're going to start making for your sleep now. And thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next video.